a great pleasure for me. I really enjoy, we do a lot of fun car stuff here at Finish Line, as most of you know. A lot of car events and cars and coffee and opening garages. But I'll tell you, and probably Bruce is the biggest advocate of this. For me, I really enjoy the people. And with coming down to Orange County and opening these facilities, I've gotten to know a whole new group of friends and people that I didn't know, a couple years ago. And so this has just been a pleasure. So for me, one of the fun things we started doing was these owner cocktail get-togethers, and they've been building, and sometimes it's like herding ants because all these guys are off traveling and doing their things, but it's really been fun. We've had some amazing speakers. Obviously, we've got the mayor of Carville here tonight, so that's a very special thing for me to have Bruce come out and take the time, because I know you're a busy guy on the automotive circuit. So I've known Bruce for maybe 15 or so years, not as long as probably many of you. And I met him back when I got involved with the first kind of Finish Line up north. And the thing that I found with Bruce it's just always been amazing to me, wherever we're at, whether we could be in Scottsdale and there's 200 people, whenever he talks to me or anybody that he's engaged with, he is 100% engaged in the conversation with you. No one else exists in the room. It doesn't matter who's there. And I'm nobody in the car world, and so I always notice that Bruce is just this bigger than life personality that's obviously very accomplished in a lot of different areas, but he takes the time, and he's always genuinely interested in everybody, and I think that's just one of the things that really makes him special. But I think that a lot of us don't know maybe some of the things we're going to talk about tonight about Bruce, and so I thought it's kind of fun to just open up the door and ask some questions here. So many of us know Bruce for his incredible car collection, the Peterson Museum, the Rodeo Drive, Concours, his big portfolio of real estate, his cowboy hat, right? The big smile. But for me personally, I don't really know maybe how you got started as a car guy. Like what was the spark, the fire? Was your dad a car guy? And so I wanted to just ask you. So what got you started?
Sure. Do I need that?
I don't know if you need it or not. I'll just kind of live here if you want.
Okay. Well, my father was as far from a car guy as there ever was. I grew up kind of in the Hollywood, LA area, and we didn't have the resources, to ever have a car that was to be very proud of. It was just awful cars. And my grandparents couldn't afford cars, so the notion of wasting your time on a car was just the biggest waste of time in the world. So my whole car, like most of the people in here, it's in your DNA. I have 3 children, and it took on one of them, and he's a complete car guy. But the other 2 sometimes come with me, but it's not part of what they are. And I think most everybody here, having that, I call it that mutant gene, that you just love cars. And if there wasn't a car within 50 miles of here, this group would have a good time chatting with one another. You'd hear about Ken's TZ1, anyways, it's just getting together. So I kind of got it all on my own. I really didn't have any friends that were car guys to speak of. I went to LA High School right in the middle of LA, but I did live in the perfect time. I was born in 41, so I experienced the hot rods of the 40s and the 50s. I went to 3rd Street School, which was directly across the street from the Art Center. And the Art Center at that time were filled with young, aspiring designers, and almost all of them had a custom car or hot rod. So I watched the hot rods pull in and the custom cars pull out, and I just fell in love with it. And I was a Boy Scout, and there was a magazine called Boys Life. I had Boys Life, Popular Mechanics, and Hot Rod Magazine. And I just poured over those. That was this is a completely diverse thing. I was talking to a friend of mine. There were no porn magazines here when I was growing up. What you get is National Geographic. You find some topless lady somewhere in the world. My God, So for me, there weren't any magazines other than a hot rod
It's
magazine.
car porn.
Car porn.
Right.
That was my car porn. So I always grew up loving hot rods. And then the more I learned about hot rods, the more I realized how important they were to almost everything we have today. My favorite car growing up was a Scarab, which was all hot rod. It was built, designed, everything about that car came from hot rodders, and it beat the Ferraris and the Maseratis and everything. Chevrolet engine, American aluminum body. There wasn't a part on that car that wasn't made in America, and that resonated. And Phil Remington, you know, all the greats, all the great hot rodders were involved in it. So I'm getting a little off track, and that was designed by Chuck Pelley, who was a young first-year student at the Art Center. So I just grew up, and, you know, I kind of got into sports cars a little bit, just looking at them. I didn't know much about them.
What was your first car?
So my first car, that's a good question. So, well, let me take a step back before that. So, if any of you are familiar with the Hollywood area, and I know Ken is, because we grew up, he's 5 years older, so he was another generation ahead of me. But there was a restaurant called Pizza Mozza. It's on Highland Avenue in Melrose. Well, that was my paper corner. And back when I was growing up, there was an evening paper and a morning paper. And some of my friends delivered the evening papers, and I had a paper corner, and it was 15 cents, and coming in a second, I lost track for saying the name of the paper. It was the Citizen News. Herald Examiner was, and Times kind of got together, but Citizen News, it was 15 cents. And, you know, you'd have the extras and the, you know, like the headlines you get at the end of the day. So it was 15 cents. I knew my customers. I knew who was going to give me 25 cents and let me keep the change. You know? So you took really good care of them. You could see them coming, and they were in cool cars, and I wore a little change belt, you know.
Right.
So I was probably making, I'm just guessing by memory, I was probably making a couple bucks a day, which was quite a bit of money when you're, you know, 13 years old.
Right.
So it didn't take long to, you know, save up. Right. And you could buy a nice 40 Ford or a 32 Ford for under $100. So at $2 a day, and you know, you work, you know, however many days a week that is, it starts to add up. Well, my parents forbid anything to do with cars. So I found a way to get around it, and I bought a doodlebug. Does anybody know what a doodlebug is? It's like this big by that big, and it's got a Briggs & Stratton motor on it. So I bought a doodlebug, and it was fun, but it wouldn't stop. It had no brakes, so I almost killed myself, and I realized I almost killed myself. So then I decided I was going to go to the next step. Well, the next step was a Whizzer, and then a Mustang, and then a motorcycle. So I went next step. I bought a Schwinn frame, and you know, like that song, you know, one part at a time. You know, I bought a Schwinn, and then I bought the motor, and then I bought the wheels, and then the tank, and so I put together a Whizzer, which looked like a motorcycle. And I always liked the high bars. You know, that was the look. You know. So
Long hair.
oh, I'm probably shorter than it is now, you know. But you know, you were tooling around on this bike when other guys were pedaling. You just go by, you know, the big ape hanger handlebars. So I had that was on my Whizzer, and all of this was without my parents' knowledge. I was really a good boy. If they asked me, I would never tell my parents why. They just never asked. And so after the Whizzer, I bought a 53 BSA. First thing I did was put the high bars on it. You know, it was just a piece of junk, but it got me around, and that was what I was like, 13 or 14 years old. So and then when I became 16, it was like a big deal, and I had saved up for a 40 Ford, which again, under $100 would get you a really nice 40 Ford. And right at that moment, my great aunt died, and she left me and my sister, who's 3.5 years older, her 50 Plymouth. That wasn't what I had in mind. So and as far as my parents,
Your sister riding shotgun?
no, my sister got it the days she worked, and so I got it on the weekends. Of course, I went about doing what all I could do with that car, painting it, and I the gear shift knob was like an eyeball. You know, I got that from the idea from Von Dutch. And my sister, even today, I mean, she is as clueless as it could ever be, especially about cars, right, for sure. So I would do all this crap to it, and I had a little sign on the side that says, "I eat Chevys." I don't know what I was thinking, but I mean, she went to work every day in that car. She worked at an insurance agency over on Wilshire Boulevard, so off she went in this old Plymouth. But so then I went off to college, and I went to Berkeley again, just California guy, and when I was going through orientation, you know, you go through orientation, you learn about extracurricular activities and so forth and so on. And I discovered there was a table with student loans, which appealed to me because my dad had given me tuition money. I had to earn my my room and board, and I had the money for tuition. But I borrowed it just the same because it was interest free, and as long as you paid it back by the end of the year, you were golden. So I had just a fistful of money. And I went out and I bought a 50 Merc because that was a car that really appealed to me too. And first thing I did was took it and torched it and brought it down on the ground. You know. So that was kind of the first car of my choice, the 50 Merc. My dad always said if I worked really hard and saved my money, he would help me buy my first car. Well, I didn't need any help, and I hadn't bought it really, as far as he knew, of any car. I had that Merc at school. My dad didn't even know it. I didn't even know about insurance. I had no idea there was such a thing. So nothing. I mean, it's just I just drove around, you know.
Right.
And the same with motorcycles. I just had no clue what insurance was. So my dad said he would help me with my first car. So in 1960, I went to order a Chevrolet Biscayne. And the Biscayne was like the bottom of the, you know, Bel Air was the top, Biscayne was at the bottom. So I knew that would appeal to him if I went for the cheapo, you know, Post, no hardtop, just, you know, which is exactly what I wanted. And then with the big motor in it, you know, something real healthy, big as I could get. And it was $2,400. So my dad said, well, you know, that works. And I said, look at that, you know, it's a Chevrolet. He liked that. The Biscayne he liked. He didn't need to know about the engine. And it was funny because Jay Leno talked to his mother into getting some hot Ford, you know, it was a four-door with a Thunderbird engine or some special engine. And he said, just to the salesman, please don't start the car while my parents are here, you know. Right. And so just this last weekend, we did an event in my garage, and Hurley Haywood was there. You may know Hurley is amazing driver. I just got to put a parenthetical about Hurley because Hurley grew up really privileged in Chicago. Henry Ford had a group of his homies, and they were called Vagabonds. It was Thomas Edison, Henry Ford, and Hurley Haywood's father. It was a group of about 8 of them, and they would go on retreats. So that tells you a great deal about Hurley. I mean, Hurley was definitely born very, very privileged. And so he talked his parents into buying him a Corvette when he went off to college. And he bought a '63 Corvette from Nicky Chevrolet in Chicago. And Nicky is with a K backwards. It was like it would be like Harry Mann in LA. It was like the place to go for the hot Corvettes. So he told the salesman, do not start this car with my parents here. Right. You're going to buy the car, everything's cool, but don't start the car. So that kind of reminds me. By the way, he took that car to Florida. Hurley was in Florida, going to college, and I just learned this from talking to Hurley. And back in the day, in my early days, we obviously I wasn't going to go road racing, but we did gymkhanas. They just take a big shopping center parking lot, put cones, and go around as fast as you can. So Hurley took his Chevrolet Corvette and ran a gymkhana. At the same gymkhana was Peter Gregg. Peter Gregg was one of the great drivers of all time. This was in Jacksonville, Florida. And Hurley beat Peter Gregg's time. Peter couldn't believe it. Peter was driving a Porsche. Hurley was driving a Corvette Stingray. And so Peter Gregg protested. He said, there's no way. We're going to do a shootout with the two of us. And Hurley won it again, fair and square. So with that, Peter was smart enough, like like Roger Penske or something, when you see somebody really good, you don't dislike him, you hire him. And so, and that's how that whole thing got started with Hurley Haywood and Peter Gregg. And from there on, it was pretty amazing combo. But so, anyways, back to my little board. I was just ready to pull the trigger on the Chevy Biscayne, and I'd always been intrigued by these little Porsches. And I didn't know much about them, but there was, in Hollywood, was Competition Motors, which was John von Neumann's shop. So I went up there, just, rode my bicycle probably, and came in, and John von Neumann back then was a pretty small deal, so he was at the desk. Right. And I found that I could buy a brand new Porsche in 1960, and so did Ken bought one in 1960. I bought it for European delivery. You could save about $300 by buying it in European delivery. I paid $2,700. So I went back to my dad. I said, I'm changing up a little bit. I'm going with a compact car with 60 horsepower. Again, I went with a low option. I knew the low option had a real ring for him. Right. So no radio. I just wanted to get that price down as low as I could. And the small engine was a 60 horsepower. And so I said, it's $2,700. He said, no, son, I like the way you're thinking, So anyways, blah, blah, blah. That started me with Porsches and stuff. From then on, I've just been a Porsche guy. I picked it up in Europe in #61. And from then on, I think that's probably the market.
So you're 16 years old and you went to Europe?
No, I'm not 16.
Okay.
No, I took it, I was probably, well, this was 60, so I was 19 years old.
19, okay.
And so, in 61 I was 20, and I decided that, again, that it would be a good idea, and my father bought into this, that I should take a semester out of school and travel through Europe. And I actually went around the world, and just to experience it. Right. And he bought into all this, he was a great guy. Yeah. And so the only reason I went abroad was to get this Porsche. I could give a shit what was going on around the world. Right. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew that I was going to end up with the Porsche. So anyway, so I picked up the Porsche in '61 and drove it through school. I think, just in talking to my fraternity brothers, and I probably had the only Porsche at Berkeley back in 1961. Right. And I always have had motorcycles. So there's a fellow named Bill Harlan. Some of you know Bill Harlan, and he and I were fraternity brothers at Cal. And Bill was a great motorcycle racer. I mean, expert, like the top level. And I was a novice my whole life, which is entry level. But we'd go every weekend. We'd go off and put our bikes in the back of his pickup truck, and we'd go ride. Right. And so Bill and I were very, very close. And so when I graduated Berkeley, I took a bartending job up at Lake Tahoe, which again seemed like a good idea. Just going wherever the women go. You just kind of follow along. And so I went up there and I worked, and when I was there, there's a famous wooden boat restoring shop called Sierra Tahoe Boat Company, and they do the big Tahoe boat shows. And the man that owned it was going through a divorce, and he had a 300 SL Gullwing with a Chevy engine in it, and I thought, perfect, because I wasn't real sure about this foreign car, the engines and stuff. So I sold my Porsche at Lake Tahoe, and I bought this 300 SL Gullwing, and I drove it for a year, and I drove it up to Berkeley. I drove it everywhere, and it was faster than a Cobra. It was just really fast, and this was in '64 and '65, something like that, '64. So I sold it to Bill Harlan when I was up at a football game. Just left it and came on back. He still owns it today. Rudge wheels, Chevy engine. It's the fastest imaginable thing. I mean, I would give friends of mine like joyrides. Right. I don't do joyrides ever anymore, but back then I was just into it. Just scaring your friends.
You ever tried to get it back?
What's that?
You ever tried to get the car back?
No, I have no interest in getting the car back. But it's in a great home, and Bill never sells anything. So he's had it since '65. He has an Allard. I've found Bill's an amazing car guy, but I'm his guy. I found almost all of his cars for him. And anyways, I don't know where I'm going with all that.
So you, at some point, you bought a speedster from somebody,
Oh, right.
and then sold it back to them.
Yeah.
And that's an interesting.
Yeah, that's a fun little tidbit. So when I came back to LA, in 64, end of 64, I decided it was time to go to Europe and get another Porsche. So I ordered a 356 SC Cabriolet, top of the line, and when in December of 64, I got a telegram saying that Porsche was not going to be making the 356s anymore. That if I wanted to upgrade $1,500 more to a 911, I could do that. I barely knew what a 911 is, but I did a little homework and figured maybe I'd do that. So I did. So I picked up a Porsche in midway through 65, and then I came back to LA with that car. The first 911 probably in LA, or one of the first. And they had platinum spark plugs. Nobody really knew how to work on it. So I then took a job in Michigan, and I didn't want to drive the car back to Michigan and have barely anybody knew how to work on in LA. So I sold it to a good friend of mine who became roommates for 6 years, still a good friend, and I bought a little 356 and I drove that back to Michigan. But I'm trying to think where. Oh, so then when I came back from Michigan, there were 4 guys. We all lived up in Hollywood, and a dump would be very kind. It was just barely livable place, and I had a motorcycle and I had this little 356. Then I bought a 912 because I bought a Corvette. I didn't like that a whole lot, so I bought a 912, and then I bought this little speedster like in the late 60s, the black one, Steve McQueen's.
Right.
And I paid $1,500 for that car. And when I was driving it away, kind of the owner said, "Oh, by the way, that was Steve McQueen's car." Well, I didn't care. It wouldn't matter to me, and I wouldn't have paid any more for it. But and he wasn't really making a big deal, but it was just passing. So I had the car for probably, well, I had it from the mid 60s to probably mid 70s. And Steve McQueen reached out, and it was through Bob Smith, who was the big dealer, told him that that I had his speedsters. He said, "Well, he didn't have my car." So I said, "Well, it's fine by me. Steve wants to see the car." So make a long story short, he saw the car. He realized it had all the trick shit that he had done to it, and he had to have it back. So literally for 3 months, every week he just called and begged. And to hear a grown man beg, and important as he is, you figure, this will come back to me at some point. So I sold it back to Steve at market price, no premium, and with the idea that he would sell it back to me if he ever sold. I figured he wouldn't have it for long. That was wrong. And then a few years later, he died and passed it to Chad. So Chad has it now. In the meantime, I went and I bought an absolute identical twin, and that's what I have now.
Right.
A little black one with brushed wheels. We drove it to Luftical. Anybody go to Luftical?
Oh, yeah.
That was pretty cool.
Amazing. So you've got a pretty eclectic collection of a lot of famous race cars, a lot of history, hot rods, classics, exotics. I know you don't call yourself a collector,
No.
right? Enthusiast, or but what made you decide to go with just the randomness? Yet, I mean, you picked the best of the best in every category. So what kind of gave you that spark to buy what you bought?
Well, I brought a stack of books here for your library, by the way, which is just in case I needed any visual aids. But I had an event in my garage, and somebody said, you had to have stolen every car in here. Well, the truth is, I paid over market for every car I've ever bought, because I've been super focused on just getting the one. And I have a phrase that I live by, and that's buy the best and cry only once. And I've lived by that because I've paid up for everything, and I've loved hot rods, so I went out and I have 10 32 Fords, just what everybody needs. And we did a little book. I'll leave it here, but they're all historic. So what I've tried to do is buy cars that have a story or tell me a story or have a meaning to me. And so I bought my first old car 52 years ago. I bought a 4-count. And so I was explaining to a friend of mine, I said, I really bought one car a year. I don't look at this as a collection because there's not a lot of commonality, but I just bought what I've liked, and sometimes I bought it earlier than people kind of figured out what it was. But I just bought them one at a time over 50 years. And I love sharing them, and maybe it's somewhat you do. I know you've been so generous about opening the finish lines, but if like you want to do a field trip from the finish line, I'd be happy to welcome it to the garage. But it's I keep about a dozen cars, and when I turned 60, our fraternity advisor at Berkeley had a short wheelbase Berlinetta Ferrari 250. Those were from like 1959 to 1961. So I just serendipitously came across the one I have now. So that was my 60th birthday present to myself. And that was the first car I ever bought that raced at Le Mans. And I paid almost twice for that, twice what the next one down would have been. And I realized that Le Mans is the only race that matters. It's the World Cup Olympic Games of motorsport. And so that kind of got me on a mission that, I would just look and see what was out there that raced Le Mans. So we ended up with 5 winners, and it's pretty extraordinary, even for myself to think about it, But they were important cars. And so each car, has a meaning like that.
Sure. And then you've got the first production Cobra, which, and a couple of early production cars, right? So,
Yeah.
Was it just your goal to get kind of the unicorns of the race world and the hot rod world and just kind of slowly assemble?
Yeah, I think the unicorn is a really good word. I never, I'm trying to think if I ever really went out looking for a car. The only car that I actually decided I wanted and I had somebody out looking for me was my Bentley, 29 Bentley, like Kip's, but not as clean. Nothing is as clean as Kip's. Next level, okay? But that's the only car I decided I wanted to get a Bentley, and in the world of Bentley, it's wonderful. It's kind of like hot rods, They don't care if the engine's from one car and the chassis from another and the body's made from new. They really don't care. They just want you to get out there and drive and enjoy them. And I appreciated that, but for me, it had to be the original chassis, body, transmission, engine. So I had a fellow looking for me, Peter Hageman, and that's when I found my Bentley, and then we had it restored in the UK, and we've driven it around the UK. We've done 3 North American tours with it. They're just awesome cars, and Kip has a car very similar to mine. Say, absolutely correct, perfect provenance. So that's the only car I really went out looking for. My Cobra was not looking for. There's an event in Paris, France called Retromobile, and Retromobile is a really special place, and COVID has knocked everything down to about half, But up until a few years ago, that was the where you wanted to go, where you wanted to see the new stuff. So I have known Cobras, and Carol Shelby was a personal good friend, and I had an SC Cobra, but I wanted to get a Cobra that was really special. I'd been looking for a long time, because the Cobras are, like, if you get a car that's been raced hard, it's probably got a new body on it, and that didn't work for me. And so I'd been looking. I'd missed out on a couple, that timing didn't work out. And I was at Retromobile and I saw the Cobra that I have now. And in Europe, there's a dealer named Lucas Hooney. And Lucas Hooney, most of his cars start at like 20 million and up, And so here was this Cobra sitting there. It was British racing green, and it was a unicorn. It had like 427 kind of ass end, small block front end, And
And it was built that way.
well, it was built, it was turned into that in '64. I commented I was going to try and trick Hooney because I wanted him to tell me about the car, and then it was a litmus test if he was lying or not, because I really know my Cobras. And if he said it was built that way, then I know bullshit, you know. So he said, Bruce, that's the first Cobra. Now, those that have Cobras know that everything is known by a CSX number. Every Cobra has a CSX number. So when you're talking Cobras, you say, what's your CSX number? Everybody knows their CSX number. So it's either a 2 or a 3 for the cars made in period, or a 4 for the continuation one. So he said, Bruce, that's CSX 2001, the first Cobra. And I'm going, right. I said, I'm thinking, he said, come here. And he sat me down. This is a Swiss guy, you know, so when he tells you to sit, you sit, you know. And he brought this big book thing in front of me and all these boxes. And by golly, this car, in the early days, people that knew Carroll Shelby knew that he invented smoke and mirrors. I mean, that man was a complete scoundrel. I mean, knew how to build a team, good friend of mine, and I respected the hell out of him. But he if there was a way around, you know, he'd figure it out. So he got this notion. He took over Lance Reventler's shop when he got the notion of the Cobra, and he ordered an AC car, you know, CSX 2000, which was his prototype car, and he heard that Ford had this little small block, so they put it in at Dean Moon shop, again, full hot rod effort, and he paraded it around like he was going to go into production. He didn't have enough for a second car. And they put it on the different magazines, and he let different drivers have it. And he aligned himself with, he knew how to build a team. I mean, on his team, you know, Phil Hill drove for him, Ken Miles, great drivers, Dan Gurney. So there was a fellow named Ed Hugas, and Ed Hugas was in Pittsburgh. And Ed Hugas was the AC distributor in Pittsburgh, raced Le Mans several times, very successful man. And so Carroll Shelby went to Ed Hugas and convinced Ed that he would make Ed the East Coast distributor if Ed would front like the first 12 or 14 cars. And Ed had to come up with the money, which he did do. And so this car, if you look at the registry, some of the first cars came to New York. All those were going to Ed Hugas' shop. So this car went to Ed Hugas' shop. It was a slab side, just looked like any small block Cobra. And it was the very first Cobra ever to race, because Ed Hugas was a racer. When right after in '64 they came out with a 289, right. Ed Hugas put a 289 in it, and then he sold it to a fellow named Lloyd. He sold it to a doctor, Richard Milo, who raced AC Bristols, and it scared the hell out of Milo. Milo turned it right back and said, "It's not for me." So there was a fellow named Lloyd Lucky Kasner, and he had a real famous team called Camerati. And if I showed you the logo, you'd recognize it. He was the Maserati guy, bird cages, very famous racer. So Lloyd Kasner went to Ed Hugas, because Ed Hugas had driven some of his cars. He said, "I'm taking that car to Le Mans, let's see what it'll do." So they take it to Le Mans, they do the trials, and right when they bring the car over, Carroll Shelby comes out with what's called an FIA car, with the big rear wheels and big rear fenders. And so Lloyd decides that they don't have a chance, because Shelby's there with all the team. He sells it to a very wealthy Frenchman, Jean-Marie Vincent, who says, "I'll take it, but I want it to be an FIA car." "Oh, thanks." So they convert the car in 1964 to what it is today. So it's interesting. Somebody ran an article on it and said, it's a shame Bruce didn't restore it back to its like 2001 early roots, like the first Cobra, so it would look like CSX 2000. Well, that, to me, that would be like taking a 32 Ford hot rod and converting it back to a stock. I mean, you just don't do that with a McGee car or Doane Spencer car. So I picked a point in time, 64, because I thought it appealed to my aesthetic, and that's what we did. So it never came out of the factory like that. And this Lucas had every picture along the way. Pretty amazing.
That's incredible.
Yeah, really great.
So with that, I mean, with the exceptional collection you have, what would you consider your crown jewel in the collection? I mean, you've got some pretty amazing cars.
Well,
You have to have one.
all right, maybe.
Not the Tesla.
The big white
Push that Tesla. That was probably Kip. And Kip put in out of one of his buildings somewhere, he found a Tesla charger, a real one, with high voltage. And he put it on the side of his building with a sign, "This is for Bruce Meyer's shit box." So today, and he means it too. And so today I went over there and figured I better plug that bad boy in because Kip will come out and see me not using it, so I want to make sure. So I guess I've got a couple favorites. The short wheelbase is probably the crown jewel, and the Cobra is probably my favorite car. And the interesting thing is Arbor is somewhere in the room, and Arbor is selling. I have a Ford GT. I'm on the board of the Henry Ford, their charitable foundation and the museum, and so I was able to qualify. And that was 4 years ago, and I just don't enjoy the car all that much. The new cars are so fast that in order to get that joy you get from like kicking ass, you're in the zone that's going to get you in big trouble. A Cobra, on the other hand, if you're going 60, you're king of the world. It makes all the noise, it gets you there real quick, and you feel every bump you go over, and so I think driving wise, I think the Cobra is probably my favorite. If I'd be the last car I'd ever sell, because I just love driving it. We did a rally from Budapest to Prague. We did the Colorado Grand in it. It's just a fun ride. So I would say the short wheelbase is probably the crown jewel, and the Cobra is probably my favorite. But then I kind of consider myself a Porsche guy just for some reason.
I can see why. So are there any cars that got away from you that you're still eyeballing or that are in your crosshairs that you have to have?
Oh, there's not a car I have to have.
No.
And if I could have one more car, what would it be? It would be a Scarab. There's only 3. John Mozart has one, Miles Collier has one, and Rob Walton has one. And I don't think I'm going to outbid any of those guys. So I feel real comfy that one isn't coming my way, and if it did, I wouldn't be able to afford it, But I would say the one car that got away, that kind of, it should never have gone away, was a blower Bentley. And this one had a great story because it was owned by a fellow named Billy Fisk. And again, I was at Retromobile, I saw the car. It was they were asking a fair hunk of change for the car, but it was worth it. It was one of 50 original blowers built by Babe Barnata, one of the Bentley boys, for Billy Fisk, who at age 16 was a wealthy Philadelphia guy, went to Europe and did a thing called the Cresta Run, which is like a luge. It's for the rich and famous. I don't know what it would be equivalent to here, but everybody that runs that, they're all a bunch of billionaires that go out and just scare the shit out of themselves on the road. So he did it. He decided he was gonna put together an Olympic bobsled team, knowing nothing about it, and he put it together. And at age 16, he won gold. Unbelievable. And he did it at age 16, and he did it at age 20. And so Bentley built him a Bentley. It was a blower. It looks just like Kip's and my car, black, stunning. And it was a situation where the price was within I could afford, and I did, but I wasn't sure what the price should be. And I checked with experts, John Bentley, Chip Connor, and Michael Kaduri, all Bentley owners, and they thought it was worth a whole lot less. So I offered less. It's the kind of thing I've learned in life since then. If somebody has something and it's at a price that you can afford, you think that's value, just say sold. Don't go in and try and cheat the deal because you'll lose it. And I lost it, and that has haunted me ever since, because it was a situation where the dealer was Gregor Fiskin, I bought cars from, and he said, the offer wasn't ridiculous, but it was less than they were asking. So they kind of came down closer to me. I mean, I should have said yes. Instead, Gregor said, Bruce, Retromobile's ending in another day. Just leave it to me. And I'm thinking I bought it. And so like a week goes by, I call Gregor, he says, you're not going to believe what happened. The guys that own Budweiser's called InBev came by, heard the price and just said, I'll take it. And they own it today. And I just, that's the car. That was a situation where I learned a lesson.
Good lesson. Yeah.
It's a good lesson. If something's fair, don't go and try and,
Yeah, for sure. So shift.
How about the guy that wanted your 275 was going to give you a GTO and some money?
The GTO thing?
Yeah, the guy that wanted your 275.
Oh yeah. Two things happened to my 275. So the car I've had the longest is a 4Cam.
Yellow.
The yellow 4Cam. And that was a situation where I bought a Porsche from SD Zipper. It was on the corner of Doheny and Wilshire Boulevard. And when I went there, they had the Ferrari dealership and the Porsche dealership. So I went in there in '67 to get my little car service. And here was a 275 GTB 4Cam, bright yellow, shiny chrome wheels, out of sight. I just I guess it was like my son seeing a Countach for the first time.
Right.
I mean, I couldn't take my eyes off this car. So I said to the service manager, God, if he ever sells that car, let me know. I had no idea what it was worth, nor did I think he would ever sell it. And so like 2 years later, in 1970, 3 years later, it got back to me, and the guy who owned it was Bill Doheny, who was, Greystone, Doheny Drive, Doheny Beach, we're talking, and his stepson is Chris Cord. I mean, these are billionaire dudes, okay? So they came up with a price. It was $10,750, which was a shit pile of money, but I found a way to get it done. So I bought the car. I'd owned it maybe a year, and a friend of mine, a casual friend who lived in Beverly Hills, came to me and said, I want to trade your 4Cam for my GTO. And he had his GTO. I've got the ad. His GTO he had in the paper for $8,500. Now I paid, call it $10,500, and he was looking for $8,500. I mean, how stupid do you think I am? So I told him not a chance,
Right.
And mine had shiny wheels and roll-up windows. If I'd have known then what I know now, that would be in my garage. So that was just, and I don't regret it because I didn't know any better. And
Right.
at the time, it seemed like a smart move. And then there was a fellow named Steve Krieger. He had a boat here in the marina called Brianna. I don't know if anybody remembers Brianna. Krieger Oil. So Steve Krieger wanted my 4Cam. And this was, I want to say, in '76. And he wanted to buy it. And for some reason, I never sold that car. Because it got to the point where it would have gotten me completely out of debt and everything,
Right.
But I just figured I'd rather have the car and keep the debt,
Right.
So Steve Krieger went and bought a brand new black '76 Porsche Turbo, brand new. And in '76 or '77, you couldn't get those cars. They were unobtainium. And so he literally put it on a flatbed, drove it to my house, parked it in front of the house, and said, I want to put your 4K. And at the time, I don't know what the Turbo was selling for, but it was worth more than what was it?
Maybe 60, 70,000. That was a lot of money.
At the time, it was that much?
Yeah.
So anyways, it was definitely worth more than my 4Cam. And I remember Terry Cargus, the executive director of the beach, said, I know Terry through his brother, Bill Cargus, who owned Beverly Porsche Audi. So, I called Bill and I said, what should I do? And Bill and I laugh about this all the time. He says, you load your 4Cam on there as fast as you can and take that turbo, because I can't get turbos. There's no turbos anywhere. That's a smoking hot deal. Of course, I passed. And Bill and I laugh about it now.
Right.
Because it was probably the right thing to do. And then I also found an ad for the exact same time Chris Cord had a Series 2 GTO that he had for sale for $8,600. So, you know, you look at GTOs, they were selling for, you know, $7,000-8,000. Alan DeCadney, rest in peace, he had like 3 or 4 GTOs because when he was buying them, they were just clunkers, you know. He'd drive them until they died and then sell them to somebody, and that's it, you know. So GTOs weren't always 50, 60, 70, 80 million dollars, you know.
Right.
So I just laugh about it now. It's not like, it doesn't haunt me. I sleep well at night. I love my 4Cam, and you know.
A good story. So shifting gears, that one of the things for me that I've enjoyed is, you know, we see all these great cars, right? Concours and all over the place at the track. But one of the things, my favorite thing, is seeing them in their spaces, their garages. And everybody's got these eclectic ideas of how they're going to do their garages. Some with all the memorabilia and gas pumps and lights and airplanes and things like that.
You're talking about Kip now, right?
I'm talking just in general. There's so many great garages that really take on the personality of the collector, and others that are stark with, I think, like Ralph Lauren, right? Didn't have a picture on the wall, and white walls, and just all the cars in there. And so you picked, you know, a modest location for your collection in the heart of Beverly Hills, right? In an old office building.
Why pay less?
To put, right? And so, I mean, what was the inspiration for that space and that garage? Because, you know, I think, especially I appreciate it looking at industrial buildings and stuff, but looking in the most, you know, unique and expensive neighborhood and second floor of an office building. How did that happen? What was the inspiration?
I mean, I'm glad you like it because there's no question why. And you look out this window here, and Tony has exquisite taste and a vision. And what you've done here and what you did in Westlake is, I mean, I don't know if anybody else could do what you did, especially here. This is just like freaking genius.
Genius.
So some of you have been to my garage at home, which looks like a swap meet. I mean, it's got shit hanging on the walls from my youth. And I remember my 4Cam is bright yellow, and I remember some people came through, and then as they were leaving, they said, "Did you sell your 4Cam?" And I'm going, "The car's right there." Oh God! I walked right by it. So I think, you know, I think less is more sometimes. It depends on what you're trying to put across. So my son Evan, who, like you and your dad, you know, we play cars together, and he has high taste, and so the where I have my cars now is a building that I've been there since '68, so I've been there 54 years, and it's been everything. It was a warehouse, it was a display thing, it was our 800 call center, it was everything, and so I decided when I was turning 70 that I was going to scrape it and just paint it all white and put a few cars up there. Just keep it real simple. Well, you know, like it took me 2 years to get the lift and the sprinklers and all that junk put in, but I think Ralph Lauren, his collection, is maybe the most beautifully curated and displayed collection in the world. Has anybody been to Ralph Lauren's collection? I don't think in the history of mankind that anybody has ever presented cars more beautifully, and I mean, it would have no surprise, right? It's Ralph, you know, the guy that gets the visual part. But it is.
Rob Walton's wasn't too bad either.
Rob Walton's is not bad, and Bill Pope.
Right.
Bill Pope kind of got the idea from Ralph on a much lower budget, and his cars aren't as extraordinary as Ralph. Ralph went out and bought great cars, paid market value, had the vision. I mean, and then displayed it in an unbelievable way. So when I first we stripped the whole garage, sandblasted a couple walls, painted everything white, and put the cars in there. You could really see the cars. So like some cars, like Peter Mullen's cars, and some of the cars that you guys have in this room are really artwork, and they shouldn't be. You know, they shouldn't be like the visual should be real clear. My stuff is more, you know, like historic and the racing thing, so we put a big black and white behind it, kind of tells what it is. But I have one sign in there, and that's it. And every now and then I'll see a sign that really appeals to me, and I'll say, "Evan, did you see that sign?" And Evan goes, You know, so Evan is my, you know, my visual conscience. He will not. We put one color photo on the wall, and I thought he was gonna, you know, rip it off, you
Right,
know.
right.
But he's very pure in his aesthetic. So I credit Evan with a lot. We worked together on it, and that's kind of what
It's a
did it.
beautiful, beautiful space. So the other piece of it is obviously the people, right? The car people. So you've met everybody in the industry, from manufacturers to race drivers, actors, everybody. And is there, other than Kip, is there anybody that's really had a big impact on your life and the hobby that really stands out for you?
Huh. Well, look at it's a people hobby.
Right.
You just get around car people. It's just, I was saying to Larry, who started the Crystal Cove, I was down here, Steve Beckman had just restored my Testarossa. Beckman Metalworks he did a rotisserie on my Gullwing and restored the Testarossa. This Testarossa is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. So I'd just gotten it done, and I wanted to drive it, and so I went. They said, "Well, you got to go to Crystal Cove." It's Saturday morning, and it was before it got shut down the first time. And I pull up in this thing, and there was not a parking space to be had, And Larry comes up and he says, "Bruce, wait right here. I'm going to give you my spot." So he just pulls out, and I said to Larry tonight, that was like, I don't know whether it's just stuck with me, I mean, it was so nice of Larry just to pull out and say, pull in here, So I don't know where I'm going with this. Oh, the people. So it's really the people. It's all about the people, and when I was younger, if I went anywhere, my kids, everybody knew that there was a car, some car element involved, because I wasn't going to go. They just knew me too well, And they used to say, "Well, Dad, go in another car deal," and yeah. And now they love it because they've met some great people through the cars.
Sure.
Whether it's Peter Mullen or Robert E. Peterson or the Principe family or people in this room, I think my family, they truly love the people we've met as much as I do.